Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And yeah, I'm going to have a lot more Giants videos. I'm going to try to give you guys daily content leading up into training camp, and then it will be undeniably daily content as we get closer and closer to the regular season. But any ideas you guys may have, drop them in the comments below, and maybe I will, in fact, make a video on it. I've definitely got 2 or 3 more ideas I got coming out over the next couple of days of storylines that I think are interesting leading up until the NFL season. But in this video, I kind of wanted to take a deep dive into the New York Giants roster and talk about some intriguing camp battles, at least things that I think are intriguing, headed into training camp for the New York Giants. Can't wait to go to training camp this year. I haven't been there in a couple of years. Last year, of course, it wasn't open to the public. And from what I read, I think it's due to start July 27th for the Giants. Not sure if that's going to be the day that it's open to the public. But when it is, I will make sure that I make it out there. And I'm looking forward to getting some live content up on the page while at training camp for you guys, and hopefully I get to meet some of you guys there. I've already talked to Bobby and Justin for Talking Giants, and we're definitely going to do something together as well. So it should be a lot of fun, and I'll keep you guys updated with that, along with the tailgate that I plan on organizing. Got to get in touch with the Giants in a couple of days, and hopefully I could set something up with some, tickets where we could sit together. But I really wanted to dive into this New York Giants roster with you guys and talk about some of the most intriguing camp battles for this team, and this year more so than any other, at least in recent history, and certainly since I've been on YouTube, there's a lot of camp battles, and the biggest reason for that is I think the New York Giants have improved their depth a ton. Like, if you look over the last 2 or 3 years going into camp, we really didn't have that many camp battles. Sure, was there 1 or 2? Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago it was Sam Beal or DeAndre Baker when Baker was in his rookie year, but we all knew that Baker was probably going to be the favorite, and there were some, minor ones here and there, but for the most part, you knew who the starters were going to be because we didn't have a ton of talent throughout the roster. This year, when you look at this team, I mean, at the wide receiver position, the tight end position, the running back position, there is a ton of talent on this team, and there's going to be a lot of players by the end of camp that you're going to say to yourself, wow, the New York Giants really cut that guy. In years past, I feel like the New York Giants were looking at other teams and trying to scoop up players that were cut from other football teams. I think it'll be the opposite this year, where there's actually some pretty talented players on this New York Giants team that don't quite make the cut and are able to sign on somewhere else. But one thing that is really important this year, especially with the added game on the schedule, is to make sure that you have a very sound, strong 53-man roster. And yes, you could certainly argue specifically on the offensive line, and obviously quarterback is a question mark, that the Giants definitely have their questions. But one thing I think you can argue is I think we have a lot of talent on this team where we'll be able to sustain some injuries this year and still have pretty productive players at a lot of positions on this roster. And aside from the camp battles, I think other interesting storylines going in, of course, you want to track the rookies and see how they're doing in camp. I think the chemistry with Daniel Jones, with the new wide receivers on this roster, is going to be a really fun thing to cover. Seeing how he's evolving with Kenny Golladay, with Kadarius Toney, with Barkley back in the offense. I think that'll be a great storyline as well. And him getting chemistry with the preseason games, which I think should go a long way with all the added weapons to this football team. But in terms of the battles, there's no real battle at the quarterback spot. We all know Jones is going to be the starter. Running back, I think, is an interesting battle that maybe a lot of people may not be thinking about. Of course, Saquon Barkley is going to be penciled in as the starter as long as he is able to start at the beginning of the year, of course, coming off that ACL tear. But there's been some rumors that he may not get a full allotment of touches until maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks into the season as he gets his beak wet. So I think it's very important this year, more so than any other, to have a lot of depth behind him. Especially, like I said, with the added 17 game to the schedule. And I don't think this year that Barkley is going to be a workhorse back. I think they'll use him in certain spots. I think he'll get a decent amount of touches, but I don't think he's going to be getting 25, 30 touches a game. I think the Giants will use at least a bit of a running back by committee approach. And when you saw what the Giants did this year, they went out there, they added a ton of running back talent behind Saquon Barkley to compete for the RB2 and RB3 positions. And that starts with Devontae Booker. Booker, to me, is more than an adequate RB2, but he's going to have a lot of competition in the backfield this year in training camp behind him. They picked up Raquel Armstead, who many felt was going to be the starter for the Jaguars going into last season, of course, before he had to opt out because he got very sick due to COVID. He's pretty talented, right? I think he's a former 4th or 5th round pick, good north-south runner, hard-nosed runner. I think he could be a decent complement to Saquon Barkley in the backfield. Of course, we all, know what Saquon Barkley is. He's a home run threat. He's a guy that can break big plays, but not necessarily a guy that excels in third and fourth and short situations. I think that's what Raquel Armstead will be brought in to do if he in fact does make this football team. In addition to that, of course, the New York Giants have the rookie running back Brightwell. Same thing. Seems like a north-south guy. A lot of people feel like he'll be a special teams contributor if indeed he does make this team. Of course, the Giants did use a 6th-round pick on him, so you would think there's a good chance that he will make the football team. And in addition to that, we also have Corey Clement, who I think obviously has a strong chance to make this New York Giants football team. Was kind of put on the back burner in Philadelphia after they got Miles Sanders, but I think any one of those 3 guys I mentioned could easily be the RB3. I think Booker's obviously the favorite to be the RB2, but I think that's an interesting battle to at least keep track of going into camp, seeing how this roster is going to shake out at that position. As far as the wide receiver position goes, I think obviously Galladay is going to be a starter. He's going to be the number 1. Shepard will be in the starting lineup, and after that, I think you have some question marks with the additions to this football team at that position. Yeah, Darius Slayton is certainly going to get some playing time. John Ross may or may not even make this roster. That's how talented we are at that position after the first-round selection of Kadarius Toney. And don't forget Dante Pettis, who's a former second-round pick from the San Francisco 49ers, who actually did a pretty good job when called in for duty for the New York Giants later in the season. So I think there's a lot of great battles at that position as well. How they're going to utilize Kadarius Toney, how he's going to fit with this roster, how they're going to use all these wide receivers in terms of what their roles will be. And I don't have the answer for you guys. I think Shepard more than likely will be the wide receiver 2 going into the season, or at least the guy that I expect to get the second amount most of looks, but that could evolve throughout the course of the season and possibly even throughout the course of training camp. Kadarius Toney and Darius Slayton obviously have some talent, along with some of the other wide receivers that I've said. But like I said, specifically at this position, we are super deep at a position that we were extremely thin at last year. Like we were talking about undrafted free agents potentially being the wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 going into camp this year. We've got a former second-round pick in Dante Pettis right now, is probably our wide receiver 6. So the depth at that position has gotten so much better. And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting storylines at that wide receiver position. The tight end spot also offers a lot of, depth and a lot of competition as well. Of course, Evan Ingram will be the primary pass catcher at the position. At least that's what you have to think going in, being that the New York Giants extended him on the 5th-year option. He did make the Pro Bowl last year. I think we all agree probably didn't deserve it, but the Giants seem to have a lot of faith in him, and he is a mismatch nightmare. We all know he's able to create separation against linebackers. He's got to hold on to the football. But outside of that, we added a lot of talent there. Kyle Rudolph. Rudolph's, been a really good tight end throughout the course of his career with the Minnesota Vikings. I think he's 32 years old, but one thing that he excels at is catching the football. I think he only has 3 drops over his last 3 years in the NFL, and I think he brings a sure-handed presence at that position. In addition, will be a tremendous help in the red zone for the New York Giants. But outside of that, that's where it gets interesting in terms of training camp. Of course, I want to see how they're going to use Rudolph and Ingram. Are they going to have a lot of 2 tight end sets in these preseason games? Things like that, but I think we all know that they're going to make the team. After that, of course, they re-signed Levine Toilolo. They gave him an extension, but they could easily cut him if he's not going to make this team. Is a blocking specialist. Maybe he could help a bit in the red zone, but was not really used in terms of being a pass catcher last year for the New York Giants at all. And the same could really be said for Caden Smith, a guy that really had a lot of chemistry with the New York Giants last year. And it'll be interesting to see if those 2 guys make the team. But in addition to that, the Giants brought in a former first-round pick wide receiver that it looks like they're going to try him out at the tight end position in Kelvin Benjamin, that Dave Gettleman, of course, drafted during his tenure with the Carolina Panthers. He's a tall threat. He's a guy that I think had 16 or 17 touchdowns over his first 2 years and could definitely provide, at least as a red zone target. Could be insurance in case Kyle Rudolph isn't ready to go, but definitely a name to keep your eye on that could potentially make this team. And there's no telling how many tight ends the New York Giants are going to roster. Of course, last year there were times where they had 4 or 5 tight ends on the 53-man roster going in, on a week-in, week-out basis, depending on who their opponents are going to be. But I think those are a lot of interesting names. And again, they're deep. They're deep at these positions. They're deep at the wide receiver. They're deep at the running back. They're deep at the tight end. That now takes us to the offensive line. And yeah, I think we all think Matt Baird is more than likely going to be the starter on the right side, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion if he struggles in training camp and Nate Solder looks as if he may have a resurgence. I think it's at least somewhat of a camp battle, and the same can be said for Zach Fulton at the guard position. Of course, right now it looks like Shane Lemieux and obviously Will Hernandez will be the starting guards, but that could change. Of course, last year we had musical chairs at the position, and again, pretty deep. We brought in some veterans on the offensive line to provide his backup, along with Jonathan Harrison, who could play both center and the guard position, has been a starter at times throughout his career in the NFL. But I think the primary battle here is going to be at the guard spot with Fulton, Shane Lemieux, and Will Hernandez. In the end, I think it'll be Lemieux and Hernandez, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I do think Barrett and Thomas will more than likely be the starting tackles, with Solder providing his pretty strong depth in terms of being a swing tackle. On the defensive line, a lot of people may not be thinking about this, but I think there's great battles going into camp at that position. I think this defensive line is vastly underrated by a lot of people around the NFL. Of course, we got the big names. I think Dexter Lawrence is going to only get better this year with his second year in the Patrick Graham defense. I think he's going to be used even more. I think he's going to be even better. It'll be interesting to see if they use him at all in terms of the nose tackle position, but he'll definitely be getting a ton of snaps, along with, of course, Leonard Williams, who better be getting a ton of snaps with the money that we paid him, but super excited to see how he progresses during his tenure with the New York Giants. But after that, things get a little interesting. You got B.J. Hill. B.J. Hill, of course, I think tied the New York Giants sack record for a rookie in his first year with 5.5 sacks. But then his second year, after we got Leonard Williams, he kind of fell out of favor with the coaching staff and didn't really get a lot of reps. And last year, you could say the same thing. But of course, now Dalvin Tomlinson is off the roster. So does that give B.J. Hill an opportunity? Along with him, you have Austin Johnson, who the New York Giants actually gave a raise. So you would think that would mean that they plan to use him a little bit more this year. Austin Johnson, of course, has ties to Coach Chaos, well at Penn State. And in limited duty, he actually looked pretty decent last year for the Giants. So I think that's an interesting battle there, along with Danny Shelton, who I think will be used primarily as a nose tackle in run-stuffing situations. But I think he'll be used situationally. I don't think he'll be out there on an every-down basis. And Ifeadi Odenigbo, don't forget about him, could play in the 4-3 alignment on the outside. Also, Dave Gettleman hinted that the Giants may plan to use him a bit on the inside and has experience at the outside linebacker position well at college. So he's another really interesting player to see how the New York Giants line him up in these preseason games and in training camp, some of the reports that we may hear. But I think, again, a very deep unit with the defensive line. And then in terms of the inside linebacker position, of course, we all know Blake Martinez is going to be the guy. But then there's a major question mark, when we're going to run 3-4 packages with two linebackers. And, of course, you're going to see Peppers in that spot a lot. They're going to move the defense around. You're going to have a lot of, formations where you have a lot of guys with the secondary out on the football field. But, again, I think situationally, you will have a second linebacker out there opposite Martinez. We brought in Reggie Ragland. Ragland, known to be a good run-stuffing linebacker, good in terms of diagnosing the run, definitely does not excel in pass coverage. So again, I think much like Danny Shelton, will be used in certain packages in certain situations. Tay Crowder. Crowder played pretty well for the Giants last year as a rookie, being that he was Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft. He will have an opportunity to potentially be the starter opposite Martinez. And Carter Coughlin has actually been getting some reps from what we've heard in some of these voluntary mini camps at the middle linebacker position. Of course, Coughlin came in out of Minnesota as an outside linebacker prospect, but maybe the Giants plan to move him into the middle linebacker spot. So again, something to keep an eye on. Along with that, Devontae Downs, who I don't think has much of an opportunity to be a starter for this team, but maybe could crack the 53-man roster, especially if there's some injuries. Last year, Downs did play very well in training camp, which is why he actually surprised and made the roster, and actually, I think, started opening day opposite Martinez. But I think this year you have more talent at that position. The edge, again, there's question marks. I'm not going to tell you it's the most talented position, but I think it's a lot deeper than it was last year, right? Last year going in, we did have Marcus Golden, but Golden never really fit the scheme. He never really got an opportunity with the New York Giants. And last year going in, we had Lorenzo Carter, we had O'Shane Ximines. Neither one of them played much because they got hurt early in the season. Well, they'll be back. We'll see how Lorenzo Carter responds off what could be a very significant injury. May not be the same player again, but we'll see. According to reports, he's looked pretty good, well at voluntary minicamp, but we'll see how he looks at training camp. I think that's a really interesting name to keep an eye on. And he's in a contract here, so he really has to impress if he does, in fact, get the opportunity with the New York Giants this year. But outside of the return of both Lorenzo Carter and O'Shane Ximines, of course, you have the second-round rookie, should have been a first-round pick, Azeez Ojulari out of Georgia, a guy that I think really fits this scheme, a former roommate of Andrew Thomas. And I think, obviously, we'll get a big opportunity with the Giants this year, being that we're, not very talented at that position. And Ojulari fits this scheme very well. So definitely got to keep your eye on in training camp. Cam Brown, the second-year pro out of Penn State, may get some reps as well. We also brought in Ryan Anderson of the Washington football team, who is I think a former second-round pick, who actually did pretty well there when given the opportunity. Fell out of favor with the coaching staff last year due to the fact that they obviously had a lot of talent now with Chase Young and Montez Sweat, and he didn't really fit the new scheme. But given the opportunity with the Giants, I think he could be a good situational edge rusher. And don't forget the rookie, Ellerson Smith, who again I think could be a very good situational pass rusher for the New York Giants. So it'll be interesting to see who's with the first unit, how they're using these guys at certain packages in training camp and in the preseason. And then one of the biggest battles going in, and I'm not even going to talk about the exterior cornerback position or the safety spot. I think we know the starters there, obviously, at those positions, but we're pretty deep there with a guy like Isaac Yiadom being a backup, who was obviously the primary starter last year opposite James Bradbury. But the other big battle, and maybe the biggest battle going into camp, is the slot cornerback position. Of course, last year the New York Giants drafted Darnay Holmes in the 4th round out of UCLA, did not surrender a touchdown as a rookie, had his ups and downs. He definitely got lost in coverage at times, but looked like he got a lot better. I think it was the Bucs game, if I'm not mistaken, where he really stood out, where I really thought he looked good. But the Giants obviously think very highly of Aaron Robinson. Robinson played slot cornerback well in college. The Giants traded up in the 3rd round to make sure that they went up and secured him. And when you look at Robinson on tape, guy is very aggressive, a very sound tackler, and looks to be a very promising prospect. So it'll be interesting to see if, in fact, he could crack the starting lineup. In the end, I think Darnay Holmes will more than likely be the opening day starter, but I don't think it's a lock. And I think that's definitely a battle to keep your eye on going into camp. So when you look around this roster, I think there's battles at the inside linebacker spot. I think there's battles at the outside linebacker spot. I think there's battles at the slot corner. I think there's battles on the interior part of that defensive line. I think there's battles in the wide receiving core in terms of who's going to be getting the most touches. The RB2 and RB3 positions. We are loaded as a roster, and I think we have a lot of talent throughout. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to win more than 8-9 games if Daniel Jones does not progress, but we certainly have a lot of talent around this roster, and I think we will be able to sustain some injuries this year at certain positions a lot better than previous seasons due to the increased talent level on this football team. And it only makes sense with all the draft picks that the New York Giants have had in recent years that we should have a much more talented football team throughout this roster. But I'm looking forward to seeing how it all breaks out in training camp starting in about 5 or 6 weeks, late July, and I'll be there. Hopefully I get to see some of you guys there as well. Like I said, look for a lot more New York Giants videos coming out on the channel over the coming days. If you have any ideas, drop them in the comments below, but I'll definitely have a video out tomorrow. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.